Did Meghan Markle secretly laugh at royal traditions while preparing to become a duchess? In a stunning new twist, Megyn Kelly drops a bombshell, alleging that Meghan mocked the crown from the inside. Sources claim she ridiculed curtsies, called royal customs stupid, performative nonsense, and even saw her wedding as a branding opportunity, not a sacred rite of passage. Now, insiders say Meghan is spiraling behind the scenes. Was the fairy tale all just a calculated performance? Tonight, we expose what Meghan really thought of the monarchy and why this revelation may shatter what's left of her royal image. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. The camera fades in. There's a hush, a moment suspended in time. Then bam! The headline slams across the screen like a lightning bolt through Buckingham Palace. Meghan Markle mocked royal traditions behind closed doors. But it doesn't come from a sleazy tabloid or a basement blogger scraping rumors from Reddit. It comes from Megyn Kelly, a former Fox News anchor, one of the most unfiltered voices in American broadcasting, and now, perhaps, Meghan Markle's worst nightmare. This isn't just another critique from a royal commentator. This is a direct accusation that shatters the carefully constructed image Meghan has spent years building. On her podcast, Kelly did what few dared to do with such surgical precision: expose the Duchess of Sussex's private disdain for the very monarchy she once vowed to serve. She claimed that before the grand wedding at Windsor Castle, behind the pearls and tiaras, Meghan laughed at the entire spectacle. Curtsying? Stupid, performative nonsense, Kelly said Meghan told her inner circle. Wearing royal hats? Like, it's the 1800s. If this is true, it's not just mockery, it's betrayal. The tone of Kelly's report was unmistakable. Biting, deliberate, and backed by unnamed palace aides who allegedly felt liberated enough to talk now that Meghan had burned every bridge in London. But Kelly didn't stop at what Meghan said. She explored the context, the calculated ambition behind the former actress's journey into royal life. According to a palace insider, it was always a branding opportunity. The romance, the titles, the public duties, they were just stepping stones on Meghan's path to becoming a global icon. The monarchy, to her, was not a sacred institution. It was a ladder. The world paused. Twitter exploded. Clips of Kelly's segment surged to the top of trending charts. Meghan's fans cried foul, screaming misogyny, racism, and agenda-driven defamation. But critics clapped back, arguing this was long overdue. For years, they claimed, Meghan had painted herself as a victim of the press, of palace politics, of outdated protocols. Now, finally, someone had dared to flip the script. But this isn't just a gossip piece. This is about something deeper. This story strikes at the core of what it means to hold power, to inherit legacy, and to exploit a symbol that stands for centuries of tradition. The monarchy, for better or worse, isn't a PR vehicle. It's a cultural monument. And if Meghan, behind closed doors, truly saw it as a joke, what does that say about the sincerity of her public role? This introduction doesn't ask you to choose a side. It asks you to confront the contradictions, to see the story behind the smile. Because somewhere between the royal procession and the Spotify deal, between the wedding veil and the Oprah interview, lies a truth too uncomfortable to ignore. And it begins with Megyn Kelly. To understand why this moment has detonated like a bomb in Kensington and California we have to rewind. Back to that fairy tale wedding in 2018, where 600 guests gathered inside St. George's Chapel and 2 billion watched across the globe. Where Meghan walked herself halfway down the aisle in a subtle message of independence, then met Prince Charles halfway for a symbol of unity. Where Oprah, Clooney, Beckham, and Serena Williams sat in hushed reverence, witnessing what many believe to be the modern transformation of the British crown. And yet, according to Kelly and her sources, that very moment, the dress, the ritual, the curtsy to Her Majesty, was all, in Meghan's words, a performance. A dress rehearsal for a role she never respected. Why does that matter? Because it unravels the foundation of Meghan's public story. The tale we've been told, of a woman of color marrying into an ancient, stiff upper-lip establishment and challenging it from the inside, becomes something far less noble. If Meghan never believed in the institution, then her narrative is not about reforming it, but about using it. Suddenly, every tear in the Oprah interview looks a little more staged. Every cry of racism becomes harder to distinguish from the politics of PR. Every retreat to Montecito feels a bit more like an escape plan than a sanctuary. Megyn Kelly's allegations strike like a scalpel, not just at Meghan's credibility, but at the media machine that made her untouchable. This isn't a woman who was blindsided, Kelly said during her podcast. This is someone who rehearsed her victimhood like a Hollywood monologue. Those are fighting words. And judging by palace whispers, they landed exactly where they were meant to, inside the inner circles of Windsor, where silence is customary and scandal is generational. The meltdown, according to insiders, began behind closed doors. Meghan was reportedly on a call when the first headlines hit. She thought it was another right-wing jab until she realized it was Megyn Kelly. Someone mainstream. Someone whose audience stretches across political lines. Someone too big to ignore. That's when the PR machines fired up. Lawyers were consulted. Friends were rallied. Meghan allegedly made frantic calls to senior media allies, demanding that the segment be discredited. But the damage was done. Screenshots were already viral. Podcast clips had gone global. YouTube channels were dissecting every quote with the zeal of forensic experts. And for the first time in years, Meghan had no safe space to run to. Spotify? Gone. Netflix? On thin ice. The royal family? Burned bridge. Even Hollywood, always ready to embrace a cause, was starting to whisper, what if we bet on the wrong duchess? The story touches a raw nerve in both the UK and the US, where Meghan has become a cultural Rorschach test. To some, she's a bold truth-teller who shook the dust off an antiquated monarchy. To others, she's a master manipulator who cloaked ambition and victimhood. But after Kelly's broadcast, the needle may have started to shift. Because this wasn't a palisade. This was a journalist who built her career on piercing through image, reputation, and the spin machines that protect the elite. What Kelly's expose reveals isn't just a private attitude, it's a rupture in the narrative. A fracture in the Meghan Markle mythos. And the aftermath may redefine how the public sees her, not as the heroine of a modern fairy tale, but as a disruptor with more strategy than sincerity. It also raises deeper, more uncomfortable questions. If Meghan did see the monarchy as ridiculous, why join it at all? Was it love? Ambition? A calculated move? And what does that say about the institution itself, if it failed to detect, or worse, ignored, the signs of internal sabotage? There are no easy answers. But that's what makes this story gripping. It's not about one woman. It's about power, narrative, and how truth often hides behind the most polished images. It's about how royalty can be both revered and ridiculed. And how one person can sit at the center of both forces at once. The emotional climax of the introduction isn't a scream. It's a silence. A question left hanging. Meghan Markle, once embraced by millions, now finds herself at a crossroads, not just in her public image, but in her credibility. Her silence in the wake of Kelly's accusations is deafening. Not because she can't speak, but because perhaps, this time, there is no safe spin. And so, as we begin this story, remember, this isn't about a wedding or a podcast. It's about truth, about the stories we're told and the ones we choose to believe. To truly grasp the weight of the allegations that have thrown Meghan Markle into a tailspin, one must first understand the voice behind the revelations. Megyn Kelly isn't just a commentator or an opinionated figure with a YouTube channel. She is a seasoned journalist who has spent decades navigating the brutal, high-stakes worlds of both mainstream news and political commentary. From her years anchoring at Fox News to her more recent ventures into podcasting and independent media, Megyn Kelly has built a reputation for piercing through celebrity spin and establishment facades. And she's done it all without flinching. Megyn Kelly's name carries influence. She commands an audience that doesn't just listen passively. They react, share, and elevate her stories to front-page status. Her words become debate points. Her interviews spark headlines. When she speaks, people don't just hear her. They take sides. And that's exactly what makes her latest claim about Meghan Markle so explosive. Because this isn't a fringe accusation. It's a calculated, carefully delivered statement from a media veteran who knows the legal minefields, understands reputation warfare, and doesn't throw darts unless she's already secured the board. Born in 1970, Megyn Kelly cut her teeth in the world of law before transitioning into journalism. Her sharp mind, courtroom poise, and unapologetic style helped her rise quickly through the ranks. By the time she became a household name at Fox News, she had developed a distinctive voice, skeptical, assertive, and independent. She didn't cater to ideological loyalty. She questioned everyone, from political elites to pop culture icons. Her most famous moment, arguably, came during the 2016 Republican primary debates, when she publicly challenged then-candidate Donald Trump with piercing questions about his treatment of women. That moment alone etched her name into media history. But her influence didn't end with Fox. After a brief, controversial stint at NBC and a subsequent retreat from mainstream networks, Kelly re-emerged on her own terms. She launched The Megyn Kelly Show, an independent podcast and video series that allowed her to speak freely without network filters. In this space, she reclaimed her voice, tapping into a growing audience that was disillusioned with corporate news. It was here, on this cell phone platform, that she set her sights on Meghan Markle. What made Kelly's commentary different wasn't just her tone, it was her access. According to her podcast episode, she wasn't merely speculating or recycling tabloid headlines. She claimed to have spoken directly to individuals connected to the palace, former aides, staffers who worked closely with the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, people who had remained silent out of fear of retaliation or out of loyalty to a code of discretion within the royal machinery. But that code, it seemed, had cracked. Kelly revealed that a former palace aide confided in her, describing Meghan's attitude toward royal traditions as privately contemptuous. The aide reportedly quoted Meghan saying the entire royal experience, especially the curtsying, the dress codes, and the formality, was stupid, performative nonsense. To Meghan, it was an act, an outdated play, and the implication was clear. She played along not out of respect, but because it was part of the optics. This is where Kelly's voice becomes uniquely dangerous to Meghan. Unlike tabloid reporters, Kelly knows how to position a story within the broader cultural moment. She knows how to strike a nerve, and not just with juicy details, but with symbolism. And this wasn't just about royal protocol. This was about authenticity, integrity, and the use of public institutions for private gain. If Meghan mocked the very traditions she claimed later to be hurt by, what does that say about the authenticity of her royal struggle? Kelly's commentary landed like a hammer, not because of the content alone, but because of the messenger. She didn't package it with venom. She presented it with the calm, clipped clarity of someone delivering a case in court. Her tone wasn't emotional, it was surgical. That made it all the more chilling. And, for many listeners, all the more believable. The reach of Kelly's show is significant. While no longer bound to a traditional newsroom, she commands millions of downloads, views, and subscribers. Her episodes trend regularly across platforms, and clips of her commentary flood TikTok, Twitter, YouTube, and Instagram. This multi-platform presence ensures her words travel far beyond the original broadcast. Within hours of her Meghan segment, influencers, bloggers, and media analysts were reacting. News outlets picked up the story. Headlines rephrased her claims, adding fuel to an already raging fire. And Meghan Markle, who has long prided herself on controlling the narrative, was left scrambling. More importantly, Kelly has the credibility to back her attacks. She isn't viewed as someone easily swayed by celebrity. In fact, her career has been marked by a consistent resistance to power structures, political, cultural, and corporate. She famously took on Roger Ailes, the late Fox News CEO, over sexual harassment allegations, which led to a broader reckoning within the industry. This history of speaking truth to power adds weight to her current criticisms. She's not afraid to take on institutions. And in Meghan Markle, she sees an institution in herself, a symbol of elite manipulation disguised as moral virtue. For those who defend Megyn, Kelly is an irritant, a thorn, a reminder that not everyone can be silenced with a brand deal or an Instagram quote. But for those skeptical of Meghan's intentions, Kelly's words are a confirmation. They lend legitimacy to doubts that have been whispered for years. Was Meghan ever truly sincere? Or was the royal chapter just a clever entry point into a bigger stage? Kelly's attack came at a particularly vulnerable moment for Meghan. In recent months, the Duchess had seen multiple projects falter. Her Spotify deal fell apart. Questions swirled about the future of her Netflix partnership. Public support, especially in the UK, had continued to decline, and her efforts to pivot into political advocacy met resistance from critics who questioned her credentials. Into this instability, Kelly delivered a narrative-shifting blow, one that couldn't be easily dismissed. It's also worth noting the broader context of Kelly's audience. She speaks to a demographic that includes disaffected conservatives, independents, and moderates, many of whom are skeptical of celebrity activism. These are not royal traditionalists in the British sense, but they are cultural traditionalists who bristle at perceived hypocrisy. When Kelly laid out her case, she wasn't just speaking to monarchists. She was speaking to a much larger audience that sees Meghan not as a victim, but as a product of media manipulation. And that's the crux of why Megyn Kelly's words matter. Because in the court of public opinion, she doesn't just offer commentary. She sets the terms of debate. Her influence isn't measured only in views or clicks. It's measured in how quickly her talking points become mainstream talking points, in how effectively she reframes stories that were previously one-sided, and in how long the ripple effects of her claims continue to shape the narrative. In short, Kelly's critique marks a turning point, not just in Meghan's media journey, but in the battle over who controls the truth. For years, Meghan and Harry have carefully constructed a narrative of trauma, oppression, and rebirth. It's been compelling, emotional, and profitable, but it's also been fragile. And now, with one well-aimed expose, Megyn Kelly has pulled back the curtain. Whether Meghan can weather this storm remains to be seen. But one thing is clear, she's no longer the only one telling her story, and the woman now telling it. Calmly, confidently, with the full force of a broadcast empire behind her, isn't backing down. That's why this moment matters. That's why it's not just another headline. And that's why Meghan Markle's team is, reportedly, in full damage control. Because when Megyn Kelly speaks, people listen. And this time, the whole world heard her. It was the most anticipated royal event since the wedding of Prince William and Kate Middleton. The union of Prince Harry and Meghan Markle was set to redefine the monarchy, injecting it with fresh blood, modern charm, and the cultural relevance of a biracial American actress marrying into the House of Windsor. From the outside, the pageantry was flawless. Thousands of Union Jacks waved as crowds lined the streets. Choirs sang. Trumpets blasted. The cameras zoomed in on every moment, capturing Meghan's veil, Harry's smile, and the historic curtsy she performed before Queen Elizabeth. But while the world saw a fairy tale, those who worked behind the scenes reportedly saw something very different. They saw tension. They saw impatience. They saw a woman who allegedly rolled her eyes behind the cameras at the very customs she was about to embrace on global television. And according to Megyn Kelly's sources, what they heard from Meghan Markle during the lead-up to the wedding was far more disturbing than mere nerves. It was mockery, sharp, unfiltered, and cold. She called the curtsy stupid, performative nonsense, one former palace aide allegedly told Kelly. She joked that she felt like she was in some Shakespearean drama, not a real-life event. According to the aide, Meghan scoffed at the idea that she had to wear hats at formal events and called them costume pieces for a pageant. She allegedly mocked the tight control over her dress, her demeanor, her speech, and saw it all as a ridiculous show, not a respected tradition. To many on the inside, this wasn't just discomfort. It was contempt. The curtsy is not just ceremonial. In royal culture, it is a sign of deference to the monarch, deeply rooted in centuries of British history. For a new member of the royal family to dismiss it in private while performing it in public was, to insiders, deeply offensive. It signaled not only a lack of respect but a potential act of deception, one that cast doubt over the sincerity of Meghan's entry into the royal fold. Palace staff reportedly began to notice Meghan's tone early in the wedding preparation process. Some said she often questioned why things had to be done a certain way. That in itself wasn't unusual. Outsiders often require context for royal protocol. But with Meghan, several staffers claimed the questions were laced with sarcasm. It wasn't, "Why is this tradition important?" one insider shared. It was more like, "This is so archaic. Who actually takes this seriously?" At first, many chalked it up to cultural misunderstanding. Meghan, after all, was American. She didn't grow up bowing to royalty. She came from Hollywood, where personal branding trumped institutional legacy. But as the wedding approached, the tone reportedly darkened. She wasn't just indifferent to royal customs. According to multiple reports, she began ridiculing them behind closed doors. Aides recall her allegedly calling royal dress codes fashion prison, complaining that every step she took was another performance for the cameras, and even joking, "If I have to smile at one more bow, I might just laugh instead." These comments, Kelly claimed, were shared with her by a staffer who no longer felt obligated to protect the royal narrative after the Sussexes' public fallout with the family. The staffer's testimony aligned with others in the palace who remained silent due to strict confidentiality rules. But privately, the whispers were growing louder. The fairy tale image of Meghan Markle walking gracefully into royal life was starting to crack. This discrepancy between public image and private disdain created unease among royal insiders. The monarchy depends on dignity, symbolism, and respect for tradition. Every movement, whether a curtsy or a wave, communicates something to the world. For Meghan to allegedly mock these symbols while performing them cast a shadow over the entire wedding. And while the public cheered the union as a sign of progress, some within palace walls feared they were watching a well-rehearsed act. One of the most telling moments came during the final dress rehearsal. According to an aide present at the time, Meghan was asked to practice her curtsy before the Queen. The rehearsal was quiet, respectful, and guided by protocol experts. But afterward, Meghan allegedly turned to one of her American friends and laughed, saying, "It's like I'm being trained for a royal circus. Where's my whip and lion?" The friend reportedly chuckled, but the staff nearby were stunned. "We couldn't believe what we were hearing," one of them said. "It was like she thought the whole thing was beneath her." These allegations, if true, paint a stark contrast between the woman the public saw and the one insiders describe. On camera, Meghan appeared poised, reverent, and proud to be joining the royal family. Off camera, according to these sources, she saw it all as a costume drama, an outdated theater she had no genuine interest in respecting. And this wasn't just Meghan joking to friends. According to reports, her attitude affected staff morale. Several senior aides reportedly felt insulted by what they perceived as Meghan's dismissiveness. Some questioned whether she truly understood the weight of the role she was about to assume, not just as a royal wife, but as a symbol of the nation. She wasn't just marrying Harry, one former advisor said. She was marrying 1,000 years of history, and it seemed like she didn't care. This behavior, as reported, also put her in quiet conflict with other members of the royal family. While Meghan reportedly mocked the formality, Kate Middleton had spent years mastering it. She had trained under the Queen's guidance, learning when to speak, how to dress, and how to comport herself in every imaginable public setting. The contrast between Kate's quiet deference and Meghan's alleged rebellion did not go unnoticed. Tensions reportedly escalated when Meghan's attitude began seeping into public appearances. When she reportedly refused to wear certain outfits, skipped traditional lessons, or dismissed guidance as out of touch. Perhaps the most striking example was the controversy over Princess Charlotte's bridesmaid dress, which has since been the subject of many conflicting reports. But beneath the dress story lies a deeper tension, the clash between someone who respected tradition and someone who, according to insiders, saw it as a joke. Meghan's frustration, reportedly voiced to stylists and aides, wasn't just about fabric or fittings. It was about the entire concept of royal presentation. "I'm not a doll," she allegedly snapped during a fitting. "I'm not here to play dress-up for the Queen." And yet, on the day of the wedding, she played the part perfectly. She smiled. She curtsied. She wore the veil. She walked the aisle with elegance and stood before the Archbishop of Canterbury like she was born into royalty. Millions watching believed it all. But according to those who were backstage, the performance was just that, a performance. What makes this story so compelling and so damaging is the duality it exposes. Meghan Markle positioned herself as a victim of a rigid, outdated system. But if these accounts are accurate, she was also someone who entered that system with little respect for its values. That contradiction strikes at the heart of public trust. If Meghan was always privately mocking the very tradition she later criticized publicly, then her narrative shifts from truth-teller to manipulator. This section of the story reveals more than just snide remarks. It reveals a calculated ability to compartmentalize, to present one face to the cameras, while laughing behind the scenes. And in the world of royalty, where everything hinges on symbolism and sincerity, that kind of duplicity is radioactive. It also brings new clarity to the eventual unraveling of Meghan and Harry's royal life. If from the beginning Meghan harbored resentment or ridicule toward royal traditions, then the explosive interviews, the leaked letters, the dramatic exit, all of it begins to make more sense. This was not a relationship that soured over time. It may have been built on shaky ground from the start. And now, years later, with Megyn Kelly blowing the lid off those backstage comments, the world is seeing Meghan's wedding not just as a cultural milestone, but perhaps as the opening act in a calculated drama. A performance, yes. But for whom? That is the question still echoing in the halls of Windsor. And it's the question the public is now asking, too. There is a phrase that once whispered inside the corridors of Kensington Palace, now echoes across every corner of the royal media landscape. It was always a branding opportunity. That single sentence, reportedly spoken by a former palace aide to Megyn Kelly, has taken on a life of its own. It has become the cornerstone of a growing theory, one that challenges the very foundation of Meghan Markle's royal journey. It suggests that her marriage to Prince Harry wasn't merely a love story. It was, from the beginning, a strategic move in a broader campaign to catapult herself into global stardom. This isn't a new accusation, but it is now being repeated by voices with unprecedented access. According to Kelly's sources, multiple former royal staffers had similar recollections. They claimed that from the very beginning, Meghan treated royal life not as a duty to the crown, but as a temporary stage, a means to an end. And that end was not service, tradition, or loyalty. It was influence, celebrity, and commercial power. From the moment Meghan stepped into the royal spotlight, she stood apart. She arrived with an established identity, a modest fan base from her acting career, and an intense awareness of how image translates into opportunity. While most royal brides fade into the shadow of royal duty, Meghan expanded. Her team grew. Her press contacts multiplied. And inside the palace, aides reportedly began to notice a pattern, a constant focus on optics, headlines, and social media narratives. According to one former communications officer, everything was calculated. Every appearance, every quote. It was about how it would play in Los Angeles, not how it would be received in London. That tension only grew as Meghan became more embedded within the institution. Insiders recall her obsession with controlling her public image, requesting rehearsals before engagements, planning photo angles, and allegedly demanding final say on press releases. None of this, in itself, would be unusual for a public figure. But within the confines of the royal family, it stood out like a thunderclap. Royals do not market themselves. They represent the institution. To treat royal life like a personal brand was not just unconventional. It was deeply unsettling to those tasked with upholding centuries of protocol. And then came the sponsorship speculation. Several former aides reportedly voiced concern when Meghan began discussing partnerships, brand endorsements, and potential future projects before she and Harry had even completed their first full year of official royal duties. One senior staffer allegedly recounted a conversation in which Meghan asked about the palace's media guidelines for outside commercial ventures, hinting at future collaborations. The implication was clear: she was planning beyond the firm. These concerns were dismissed at the time. After all, Meghan was still adjusting to life under intense scrutiny. Her supporters argued that she simply needed space, understanding, and autonomy. But in hindsight, those conversations now carry a darker subtext, one that suggests Meghan always saw her royal title as a short-term contract, not a lifelong role. The branding theory gained further traction after the Sussexes' departure from the royal family. The speed and precision with which they launched their new ventures shocked even veteran media analysts. Within months, they had secured multi-million-dollar deals with Spotify, Netflix, and other platforms. They unveiled Archewell, a foundation that blurred the line between philanthropy and content production. They released a glossy website, staged exclusive interviews, and reportedly negotiated for ownership and control over their projects. It was a masterclass in celebrity rebranding, and it all happened so quickly that many questioned just how long the plan had been in place. If this was spontaneous, one royal commentator noted, then it was the most organized spontaneity we've ever seen. Behind the scenes, palace staff now believe the groundwork was laid long before Megxit. According to multiple insiders, Meghan began consulting with Hollywood power players while still living under the royal roof. Entertainment lawyers, PR strategists, and former agents reportedly received discreet calls from her circle, laying out post-royal ambitions that included podcasts, documentary series, books, and political advocacy. But the most telling detail, some argue, was Meghan's alleged resistance to internal palace training. All senior royals undergo behind-the-scenes education on etiquette, constitutional law, media protocol, and royal history. According to multiple sources, Meghan reportedly dismissed or skipped several of these sessions. One aide claimed she rolled her eyes at a session about the royal archives, asking, "Why do I need to memorize names of people who died centuries ago? Another said she walked out of a media briefing on protocol, muttering, "This is just damage control for outdated rules." This apparent lack of interest in the institution's substance alarmed even those who had welcomed her presence. They had hoped Meghan's modernity would complement the crown, not replace it. But from their perspective, Meghan wasn't adapting to the monarchy. She was bending it to serve her pre-existing goals. More damning still was her private correspondence, portions of which were leaked following the infamous Mail on Sunday court battle. In messages to her former communications advisor, Meghan described the need to set the record straight and control her own narrative. She appeared more concerned with media perception than internal resolution. The lawsuit itself, though framed as a stand against press intrusion, was also interpreted by some as part of a broader image campaign, a calculated effort to redefine her public persona, court by court, press release by press release. This obsession with narrative, insiders claim, bled into her personal relationships. Several palace aides reportedly resigned after being overwhelmed by the pressure of managing Meghan's demands. A few cited emotional distress and miscommunication. Others, according to leaks, claimed they were mistreated. The infamous bullying report, which remains unpublished, allegedly contained testimonies from staffers who described the Sussex office as toxic. While Meghan has vehemently denied those claims, and defenders cite racism and bias as motivating factors behind the backlash, the timing and volume of those resignations continue to raise questions. All of this feeds into the idea that Meghan saw the royal family not as a destination, but as a bridge, a temporary phase that would amplify her voice, legitimize her activism, and boost her market value. From the perspective of those who worked closest to her, it all felt transactional. The wedding, the tiara, the walk down the aisle, all props in a broader rebrand that ended not with a crown, but with a Netflix contract. The consequences of that perception are profound. If Meghan truly did treat the royal family as a branding opportunity, it reframes every public statement she's made since leaving. The claim of seeking peace and privacy becomes harder to believe when juxtaposed with high-profile interviews, paparazzi-style photo ops, and celebrity partnerships. The tearful monologue about institutional cruelty seems hollow when viewed through the lens of strategic positioning. And yet, Meghan has always insisted her departure was about survival, not strategy. That she and Harry left because they were cornered, vilified, and unsupported. To her defenders, the branding argument is a smear campaign, a sexist, racially tinged narrative designed to punish a woman who broke the mold. But even her defenders have struggled to explain the contradictions. Why did she reject royal training? Why were media deals prepared so quickly after their exit? Why do so many former staffers echo the same sentiment? Bet she never really intended to stay? The truth, as always, lies somewhere in the murky space between perception and intent. Maybe Meghan did enter the royal family with good intentions, only to be disillusioned by what she encountered. Maybe the branding strategy evolved over time, as survival turned into reinvention. Or maybe, as her critics argue, the plan was there from the start, disguised in romance and revealed in rebellion. What is undeniable, however, is that Meghan Markle today is no longer a royal. She is a brand, a global entity, a polished persona with a product pipeline and a strategic vision. And whether that transformation was accidental or intentional, it began in the shadow of a palace. And that, to those who cherish the monarchy's sanctity, feels like betrayal. So when Megyn Kelly quoted that aide, when she repeated the words, "It was always a branding opportunity," she wasn't just exposing a personal opinion. She was unlocking a perspective many suspected but dared not say aloud, that Meghan never truly belonged to the crown. She simply borrowed it. And now, the bill has come due. The British monarchy, for all its grandeur and tradition, operates behind a near-impermeable curtain. What is seen by the public is the polished surface, a well-rehearsed performance of unity, grace, and inherited duty. What remains hidden, by design, are the tensions, conflicts, and human complexities that unfold behind palace walls. But every once in a while, cracks emerge. Whispers turn into voices. And when those voices find a platform, they can shift the entire public perception of even the most protected figures. That's exactly what happened when a cluster of anonymous palace insiders, former aides, assistants, and staff members who once worked in close proximity to Meghan Markle, decided to speak out. Their statements, once murmured in trusted circles, were finally given a stage through Megyn Kelly's podcast. According to Kelly, these whistleblowers came forward after years of silence, emboldened by time, frustration, and a sense of moral duty. And what they revealed, if accurate, paints a troubling portrait of Meghan's private conduct and mindset, one at odds with the sympathetic, poised figure the public saw in interviews. The most chilling revelations came not from grand betrayals, but from passing comments, offhand remarks allegedly made by Meghan in private that revealed a deeper disdain for the institution she had joined. She called the whole process demeaning, said one former royal assistant who allegedly served on Meghan and Harry's team in the months leading up to their wedding. She once told a friend during a private lunch, "These people bow to an old woman in a hat and call it duty. It's absurd." That quote, if true, would be damaging enough on its own. But it was followed by a slew of other claims, moments that individually might seem trivial but collectively created a pattern of disrespect. Meghan reportedly rolled her eyes when being instructed on the order of precedence in public events. She allegedly questioned why the Queen should be greeted before others, joking to her stylist, "Shouldn't age and rank be earned, not inherited?" These weren't policy disagreements or philosophical reflections, they were, according to those who worked with her, casual insults that made the working environment increasingly uncomfortable. Another former aide shared with Kelly that Meghan once mocked the royal family's Christmas walk to church, calling it a staged parade for outdated faces. When asked if she would wear the appropriate conservative outfit expected of royal women during that tradition, Meghan allegedly replied, "I'll wear what looks good on Instagram." The aide, who claimed to have worked in royal communications, said she was stunned. "That wasn't just a personal preference," she said. "It was a total rejection of everything the family stood for." There were also reported incidents where Meghan clashed with palace staff over her treatment of royal courtiers. While no official public statement has ever detailed these conflicts, multiple resignations during Meghan's time in the palace, some abrupt, others unexplained, suggested a high-pressure environment. According to one now-retired household manager, staff were afraid, not just of Meghan's temper, but of the media firestorm that could follow if they said the wrong thing. She knew the press would always spin it in her favor. That was her power. Perhaps the most damning allegation came from a woman who claimed to have served Meghan in a private administrative capacity during the first year of her marriage. She described a moment when Meghan was handed a briefing packet detailing a community charity project, including notes from Queen Elizabeth and then Prince Charles encouraging her to embrace the cause. According to the aide, Meghan barely glanced at the materials and allegedly said, "This isn't my brand. I'm not here to be a secondary character in their story." The aide left her post weeks later. The phrase, "my brand," appeared in several accounts, used frequently, according to the whistleblowers, in conversations about Meghan's future outside the royal family. One recalled that Meghan was obsessed with ownership, not just of her voice, but of images, quotes, and even gestures. She allegedly clashed with royal photographers about candid moments and was said to have demanded final approval over some official portraits, a request that was firmly denied. This refusal reportedly enraged her. She said, "They want to use me as a mascot, and I'm not having it." In a world where discretion is the ultimate currency, these quotes cut deeply. They not only cast doubt on Meghan's commitment to her role, but also call into question the authenticity of her post-royal narrative, that she was driven out by cruelty and institutional rigidity. If these insider accounts are accurate, they suggest a woman who was not pushed, but poised to pivot the moment she saw fit. One of the most explosive accounts shared with Kelly involved a story about Meghan's reaction to the Trooping the Color ceremony, an annual event celebrating the Queen's official birthday. Meghan reportedly complained that she was placed too far from the center balcony position, which traditionally features senior royals. When explained that her placement was based on royal hierarchy and protocol, she allegedly snapped, "They're lucky I even agreed to stand up there at all. I bring the attention. I bring the crowd." The comment, if true, reveals not just frustration, but a sense of superiority. Another aide described how Meghan allegedly reacted when told to wear a certain brooch for a memorial event, one that had belonged to a former royal. "She held it like it was a dead thing," the aide said. She asked, "Do they really expect me to wear this antique as if it means something to me?" While some may see this as a moment of discomfort or personal taste, palace staff reportedly saw it as a dismissive insult to legacy. These recollections were not offered casually. According to Kelly, the whistleblowers approached her with careful deliberation. They knew the risk of speaking out. They knew Meghan's legal team could move swiftly, but they also felt the need to provide context. Context they believed was missing from the heavily curated public image Meghan had cultivated. They were tired of being portrayed as bitter, racist, or incompetent. They wanted to speak not as enemies, but as witnesses. Importantly, Megyn Kelly vetted their accounts. While she did not name them, she claimed to have confirmed their identities and their former roles. She stated clearly that she believed their testimonies were credible and consistent. Her reputation, she noted, was built on confronting powerful people, not fabricating stories for attention. And her detailed presentation of these quotes and stories reflected that confidence. Of course, Meghan's defenders argue otherwise. They suggest that these leaks are part of a coordinated smear campaign, driven by jealousy, xenophobia, and resentment. They point out that none of these former aides have gone fully on record, and that anonymous sources cannot always be trusted. But even they must reckon with the volume of accounts, the consistency in the tone, the way these recollections align with prior rumors, timelines, and confirmed resignations. It's not just one quote that damages Meghan's credibility. It's the cumulative effect. One person might be biased, but a chorus of aides, all echoing similar sentiments, all describing similar behavior, that begins to look like a pattern. And when that pattern matches the arc of Meghan's post-royal evolution, it becomes difficult to ignore. There's also the question of timing. These leaks didn't emerge at the height of Meghan's popularity, when she and Harry were giving explosive interviews and captivating the global press. They came after the storm, after the Spotify contract dissolved, after archetypes ended, after public opinion began to waver. The whistleblowers weren't jumping on a bandwagon. They were stepping into a vacuum, offering a counter-narrative when Meghan no longer controlled the headlines. One might ask, why now? Why speak out after all this time? According to Kelly, the answer was simple. They said they couldn't stay silent anymore, that they were watching the truth be rewritten, and they had to set the record straight. In royal history, betrayal has often come in whispers. But in the case of Meghan Markle, those whispers have now been amplified. By podcast hosts, by journalists, by the disillusioned voices of those who once served beside her. And whether the world chooses to listen or dismiss them, these whistleblowers have forever changed the conversation. No longer is Meghan's royal tenure just a story of victimhood. It is now also a story of strategy, defiance, and, if the quotes are to be believed, deep and deliberate disrespect. If the whispers from former palace staff were like cracks in the foundation of Meghan Markle's public image, then what happened next was the tremor that made the entire structure shake. According to multiple insiders who spoke with journalists off the record and through intermediaries, Meghan Markle did not take kindly to Megyn Kelly's revelations. In fact, what unfolded behind the scenes, following the explosive podcast episode that exposed her alleged mockery of royal traditions, was nothing short of a personal and professional meltdown. The moment the episode dropped, Meghan was not in a studio, not on set, not at a red carpet event, but at home in Montecito, California. The tranquility of that sprawling estate was reportedly shattered by a flurry of incoming notifications, messages, and forwarded links. The headlines were brutal. Meghan called royal traditions stupid, says Palace Insider. Megyn Kelly drops bombshell about Meghan's pre-wedding disdain. The story had gone viral in hours. It was no longer just podcast content. It was being dissected on cable news, across social media, and in entertainment newsrooms on both sides of the Atlantic. According to a close source with knowledge of Meghan's team, her initial reaction was disbelief. She allegedly called a senior advisor on her staff and said, "She did what?" On air, the source claimed Meghan had expected that most of her old critics would eventually lose steam. But Megyn Kelly's report was something different. It wasn't a smear job by a tabloid or a predictable royal gossip piece. It was strategic, sharp, and coming from someone with serious credibility. And it hit where Meghan was most vulnerable, the gap between her public brand and her alleged private beliefs. From that moment, panic set in. Within hours, crisis meetings were reportedly held at Archewell headquarters. Meghan, known to be extremely hands-on with her public relations, allegedly took full control of the response. One insider described her as visibly shaken during Zoom calls, pacing back and forth and obsessively reading aloud quotes from the Kelly episode. "This is character assassination," she reportedly said. "She's attacking who I am, what I stand for. We need to shut this down." But shutting it down wouldn't be so simple. Megyn Kelly had not just spoken off the cuff, she presented her sources with journalistic rigor. According to Meghan's communications team, legal avenues were briefly considered. Could they sue for defamation? Could they issue a cease and desist to Kelly's production company? Lawyers were consulted, and it was quickly determined that since Kelly had quoted unnamed insiders and never presented outright falsehoods, there were no clear grounds for legal action. The more Meghan realized she couldn't silence the report, the more erratic her behavior allegedly became. One insider recalled how Meghan, during one frantic strategy session, said, "She's trying to destroy me. She's trying to make me into this fraud. We need to counter it now." Plans were then laid out to flood media channels with positive press. Meghan was urged to issue a public statement, but she refused. "Responding gives it life," she reportedly snapped. "We bury this with presence, not reaction." And so, the counteroffensive began. Within days of the Kelly episode airing, Meghan's PR machine rolled out photos of her visiting a charity in Los Angeles. Camera crews followed her discreetly as she handed out care packages and hugged school children. A glowing profile on Meghan's style and philanthropy appeared in a fashion magazine that same week. Meghan's name was suddenly back in the headlines, but this time framed in words like graceful, compassionate, and modern icon. Yet behind the scenes, Meghan was still fuming. According to someone close to the Archwell organization, she demanded a full audit of all current team members and their connections, reportedly convinced that someone inside her circle had been leaking information. She didn't say it directly, the source said, but she made it clear someone would pay for this. This internal paranoia began to unravel her inner circle. Staffers who had been with Meghan since her transition to the United States were suddenly sidelined. One communications officer was allegedly removed from active projects, without explanation. Another resigned a week later. Morale, according to reports from those close to the foundation, dropped to an all-time low. Harry, too, was caught in the storm. Sources suggest he tried to calm Meghan during the height of the fallout. One close friend of the couple said, Harry told her to breathe, to ignore it. But she wasn't in a place to hear that. The same source claimed Meghan was furious that Harry had not publicly defended her. "He's the prince. Why isn't he out there saying this is false?" she allegedly asked during a tense moment. What made matters worse for Meghan was the silence from the royal family. Not a single official from Buckingham Palace or Clarence House commented on the matter. The firm remained, as always, stoic and mute. To Meghan, this was a signal, one she interpreted as confirmation that the royal establishment was secretly celebrating her humiliation. According to reports, she even referred to them in private as cold-hearted cowards, accusing them of letting Kelly speak for them. Her closest allies in Hollywood also reportedly started to grow quiet. Unlike during past controversies, when high-profile names would rush to Meghan's defense on social media, this time the silence was deafening. Not one major celebrity spoke out in her favor. Some quietly told reporters that they were waiting to see how it played out. Others reportedly didn't want to get entangled in a story that, unlike Meghan's previous conflicts, didn't involve clear victims or racist overtones, but rather revolved around authenticity and truth. The emotional toll on Meghan was said to be severe. According to someone familiar with her routine, she stopped attending her regular wellness appointments, canceled public meetings, and became increasingly withdrawn at home. Her team tried to manage the optics, presenting her absence as a needed retreat to focus on family and projects. But internally, the mood was grim. One dramatic moment reportedly took place during a conference call with Archwell's leadership. A high-level advisor presented analytics showing a significant dip in Meghan's online approval ratings. Meghan, in a flash of fury, reportedly shouted, "I gave up everything for this family. I was the one who wanted to make them human again. And this is what I get." The outburst stunned the team into silence. One staffer described the call as the moment they realized things were breaking apart. For days, the fallout continued to ripple. British tabloids dissected Kelly's claims with glee, but even traditionally Meghan-friendly outlets in the U.S. began reporting on the story with increasing seriousness. Morning talk shows invited royal commentators. YouTube channels analyzing royal controversies saw massive spikes in viewership as audiences flocked to dissect each alleged quote, each whispered detail. The story was no longer about whether Meghan had said those things. It was about what those things meant. Was this the moment her image began to truly fracture? Was the public finally waking up to the idea that behind the tears and confessions might be something more calculated? By the end of the week, Meghan's team had shifted strategies once more. The goal now was not just to drown out the story, but to pivot. A long-gestating project, rumored to be a memoir or self-help book, was pushed forward in the release schedule. Megyn reportedly instructed her publishers to prepare a teaser that focused on misunderstanding, growth, and resilience. An upcoming podcast appearance was rearranged to include an emotional segment about finding her voice and facing public betrayal. The messaging was subtle, but the intent was clear, to recast herself not as a schemer, but as a misunderstood reformer. Yet for those behind the scenes, the damage had already been done. The very fact that Megyn had unraveled so intensely, accusing insiders of betrayal, obsessively monitoring the media, lashing out at advisors, had confirmed what many critics suspected, that her public composure was a shell, that beneath it was a person far more fragile, far more vindictive, and far more consumed by control than previously understood. This alleged meltdown was not just personal, it had professional consequences. Multiple staffers resigned in the weeks that followed. Two prominent donors to Archwell reportedly paused their contributions, citing strategic redirection. And one major media partner quietly pulled out of early talks for a Megyn-led documentary series, without offering a reason. What began as a single podcast episode had spiraled into something much bigger, a full-on crisis for the Duchess of Sussex. A test not just of her public image, but of her inner world, her team, her control, her ability to navigate backlash not with silence, but with strategy. In the end, perhaps the most revealing detail isn't what Megyn allegedly said in the past, but how she reacted when the past came back to confront her. Not with reflection, not with denial, but with panic. And that, for many, said more than any quote ever could. Long before she ever stepped onto the grounds of Buckingham Palace, before the walk down the aisle and the cameras that captured every second of her transition into royal life, Meghan Markle had already lived a carefully curated version of celebrity. Her life in Los Angeles, her acting career, her relationships, her ambitions, all of it was the prelude to her global breakout moment. But now, in the aftermath of Megyn Kelly's revelations and the unfolding controversy around Meghan's private remarks and her alleged disdain for royal customs, a new layer of her story is being re-examined: her past. What were Meghan's intentions before meeting Harry? Did she always dream of royalty? Or was she already planning something far more deliberate, a transformation that began long before she shook hands with a single royal courtier? These questions have become more urgent as individuals from Meghan's past have stepped forward, not to issue scathing judgments, but to offer quiet, revealing glimpses into who she was before the crown. And many of those stories now paint a picture that aligns disturbingly well with the theory that Meghan's journey into the royal family may not have been the whimsical tale of love the public was sold. One such voice is that of a former college acquaintance who, under condition of anonymity, spoke to a London-based journalist shortly after Megyn Kelly's podcast aired. She recalled a time in college when Megyn was asked by a friend what kind of man she wanted to marry. Her answer was almost too specific, the woman said. She didn't say she wanted a kind man or a funny man. She said, someone powerful. Like, someone really big. Someone respected. I want to do more than act. I want to change the world. And I need someone whose name opens doors. We all laughed, but she wasn't joking. Another former friend from Meghan's early acting days offered a similar perspective. Speaking on background to a U.S. media outlet, she recalled a conversation Meghan had in Toronto during her time filming the show Suits. She would talk about the royals sometimes, not as fairy tale characters, but as people to study. She'd say things like, Kate's playing the long game. She's boring, but she'll win. She seemed fascinated by how the royals operated, almost like she was analyzing them. It was around that same time, years before Meghan even met Prince Harry, that she reportedly began pivoting her public persona. Those who knew her during her early acting years described a shift. Her fashion changed from bold and provocative to more polished and understated. Her Instagram, once filled with vacation selfies and shots of her with friends at parties, became more refined, highlighting yoga, reading, and philanthropic quotes. Her now-defunct lifestyle blog, The Tig, began focusing on humanitarian interests, empowerment themes, and travel that subtly echoed diplomatic aesthetics. According to one digital strategist who followed her blog closely, it was clear she was rebranding. She was moving from starlet to statewoman. And she was doing it step by step. One of the most cited and controversial revelations came from Lizzie Cundy, a British television presenter and socialite who once considered herself friendly with Meghan. In interviews over the years, Cundy has claimed that Meghan explicitly asked her to help find her a famous British man. According to Cundy, this request was made at a charity event years before Meghan's royal courtship. She wanted to be part of the London elite, Cundy has said, and she wasn't subtle about it. At the time, few paid much attention to the comment. But after Meghan began dating Harry, the story gained new life, and in the wake of the Kelly expose, it's once again being cited as evidence of premeditated ambition. Then there's the matter of her previous marriage to film producer Trevor Engelson. While Meghan has never spoken in detail about that relationship, those close to both parties have described a stark contrast between the person Trevor knew and the Duchess Meghan became. Engelson reportedly supported her early career moves and was instrumental in helping her navigate the industry. But when her career took off in Suits, the relationship began to sour. According to friends of Engelson, Meghan's transformation became apparent. She wanted more than he could offer, one friend said. It wasn't just about love, it was about the life she wanted. And he didn't fit into that plan anymore. This pattern of reinvention, of intentional alignment with power, has raised fresh scrutiny. Meghan's journey from cable actress to duchess may have seemed sudden, but when viewed through the lens of her past, it appears increasingly methodical. Several acquaintances have pointed out that Meghan was always extremely aware of perception, image, and narrative. She wasn't fake, one college friend clarified. But she was intentional. Everything she did had a reason. One former publicist who briefly worked with Meghan during her Suits tenure remembered her as polite but incredibly focused. According to him, Meghan was always asking how certain statements would play in the press, which headlines to avoid, and how to cultivate the right kind of visibility. She wasn't looking for fast fame, he said. She wanted curated elevation. There's a difference. Perhaps most telling is how Meghan's social circle shifted during her transition to royal life. Old friends from her Toronto days reportedly found themselves shut out. Invitations stopped. Texts went unanswered. It wasn't personal, one former friend remarked. It was business. She had moved into a new sphere, and there wasn't room for people who didn't fit the brand. This rebranding wasn't just about distancing herself from the past. It was about constructing a new identity, one that was compatible with global influence. Those close to her have described how she admired figures like Angelina Jolie and Amal Clooney, not just for their success, but for their ability to blend celebrity with diplomacy. Meghan wasn't content with being known. She wanted to be significant. And so, when she met Prince Harry, it wasn't just love, it was a convergence. A meeting of opportunity and desire. Their romance may have been genuine, but according to several individuals who interacted with Meghan before and during that period, it was also, for her, a pathway. She wasn't walking into royal life blind. She had studied it, modeled herself after it, and made preparations long before the public ever knew her name. Even the wedding, so often described as a fairy tale, was, in some ways, a culmination of this transformation. By then, Meghan had already positioned herself as a feminist icon, a humanitarian voice, and a modern woman challenging an ancient institution. The gown, the veil, the choir singing "Stand By Me," they weren't just ceremonial. They were symbolic milestones in a journey she had been building toward for years. None of this is to suggest that Meghan's intentions were purely cynical, but it does suggest that her entry into the royal family was not as spontaneous or naive as it was once portrayed. And that matters, because it reframes everything that came afterward, from her clashes with palace aides to her eventual departure from the royal system. If she entered with a plan, then the chaos that followed wasn't a reaction to oppression, it was part of the design. In the end, what these old friends and new revelations reveal is a woman who has always been in control of her image. A woman who knew the rules of fame long before she walked into the royal spotlight. And perhaps most importantly, a woman whose past now casts a long shadow over the story she tells about herself today. It's that shadow growing longer with every leak, every quote, every resurfaced anecdote that has left the public wondering how much of Meghan Markle's journey was love and how much of it was strategy. Few comparisons in recent royal history have generated as much debate, intrigue, and controversy as that of Meghan Markle and Kate Middleton. Both women stepped into the same institution from the outside. Both became duchesses upon marrying princes. Both were expected to embody grace, duty, and a commitment to royal tradition. And yet, the divergence in how each woman approached the role and how they were perceived in return has been nothing short of dramatic. The stark contrast between Meghan's alleged mockery of royal customs and Kate's widely observed devotion to them has become a focal point in discussions about the monarchy's future and its internal dynamics. It's more than a matter of public image. It speaks to the very soul of what it means to serve the crown. Kate Middleton's royal journey was slow, measured, and meticulously traditional. Long before she became the Princess of Wales, she spent nearly a decade beside Prince William in the public eye, gradually adapting to the demands of royal life. She did so without complaint, scandal, or spectacle. Her path was marked by restraint. When the press criticized her for being too quiet, too plain, or too deferential, Kate didn't retaliate. She simply stayed the course. She learned the rules before playing the game. She respected the system before attempting to influence it. According to former palace staffers, Kate underwent extensive and formal training before she even became engaged. She studied royal history, shadowed senior members of the family, and was mentored by palace advisors. Her respect for Queen Elizabeth's legacy was apparent early on. One aide who worked closely with both William and Kate recalled, she never once questioned the traditions. If anything, she was nervous about living up to them. She saw it as an honor. Her wardrobe reflected that humility, modesty.